Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Ayin Dalid Amud Beis, the third line from the top. The Gemara previously quoted four avos malachos being Hazoire, Haboirer, Hatoichen, V'Hamaraked. And the Gemara said that the three malachos of Hazoire, V'Haboirer, and Hamaraked are similar in that they're all involving the process of selecting. Nonetheless, since each one was done in the Mishkan, they're separately then mentioned here in the Mishnah as a separate Av Malacha. In between, we mentioned the Malacha of Toichen. Now the Gemara goes back to the Malacha of grinding. Says the Gemara, Omrav Papa, Haiman de Porim Silka Chayiv Mishum Toichen. He says a person cuts silka, beets, into very small pieces, he's going to be chayiv toichen. Now it's not clear exactly the size of the pieces, but they're cut small, and therefore similar to grinding, although it's not grinding in the terms of making it a completely different type of composition, but nonetheless it's a tolda of toichen by cutting a small silka in small pieces. Omer Rav Menashe Haiman de Solis Silti Chayim Mishun Toichen. The Gemara says another chiddush, even when it comes to chopping wood into small pieces. Again, even though here it's not talking about the vegetable or it's not talking about a beet, but it's something that's still gedule min hakarka, that also would be considered grinding the malacha of toichen, a tolda of toichen. Omar of Ashi ikopid amishchasa chayim mishum mechatech. If a person is particular about the measurement when he cuts those pieces of wood, then he's going to be chayiv for mechatech, which was done in the Mishkan when they would cut the various hides, and they would cut the pieces of leather, the pieces of hides, to separate, measured out pieces. That's a malach of mechatech. Gemara now quotes the Mishnah, two more malachos, v'halosh v'ha'oife. It says that one who needs, the kneading is a malacha, and also the baking of bread is a malacha. Ask the Gemara, Amra Papa, shova ktana didon bishul samamonim dahave b'mishkan v'nokat oifa. The Tana leaves the concept of cooking samamonim, which was done in the Mishkan. They would take herbs and they would cook it to be used for the dye. And instead, the Tana brings oife, baking bread. Baking bread was not one of the malachos in the Mishkan. Granted, there was lechem haponim, but in terms of the construction of the Mishkan, there was no such malacha of oife. Says the Gemara, Tana didon sidura de pas nokat. Our Tana is mentioning the first 11 malachos as 11 malachos that have to do with sidura de pas, the essential process of making bread. And the Tana chose to use oife and the malacha of the malachos that have to do with the sidura de pas because that's more typical than the bishul of samamonim. But in Ochanami, when it comes to the malacha of the Mishkan, it was done indeed a bishul of the samamonim. Amar Rav Acha bar Rav Avira Haiman de Shoda Sichto La'asuna Chaye Mishum Mevashel. If a person takes a peg that is moist and he throws it into the tanur in order to then take out its moisture, dry it up, and harden it, he's going to be chaye for Mevashel. Frek the Gemara Pshita. That's obvious. Does it make a difference if he cooks herbs or if he cooks a piece of peg, a piece of wood? No, Ma'ud is saying, he only intends to strengthen it, to harden that piece of peg, that wood. And therefore I think is not going to be chayiv because indeed it's only coming to harden it. He first softens it and then hardens it. The process of cooking first breaks it down to make it softer. That is the process of cooking, even if afterwards it's only temporary to become then hardened as a result. Omar Rabbe bar Rav Huna Haiman de Arto Kufra Chayiv mishum mevash, if a person, he were to then take the tar and liquefy it by putting it on fire, he's going to be chayiv from mevash. Again, frek the Gemara pshita. Why should we think otherwise? He's taking the tar that is right now hard and he's then liquefying it by cooking it into fire. So therefore, that's of course bishul. Says the Gemara, no, I might think otherwise. Since it's only, again, to get it to be hardened, it's only going to be a temporary process of first liquefying. Thereby, I might think it's not considered to be a malacha mevashel, kamash malan, it is bishul. Amar Rave said, Haiman da ovar chavisa. If a person wants to make a ceramic barrel, chayiv mishum sheva chatois. He's going to be chayiv for 7 different malachos, 7 different chatois. Let's take a look at Rashi together. Rashi is about 8 lines before they get wide in the Rashi. Dibar maschel sheva chatois. Let's take a look at Rashi, how he enumerates the 7 different malachos. First of all, he says, Toichen haregovim v'soichkon hadek have toichen. He takes the glob of earth and he then makes it into fine particles. That's going to be the malach of grinding, toichen. Ubarer hatzroros hagasas mitoichon hareishtayim. He takes out the small pebbles from them. That's going to be the malach of boirer, selecting. Markidim benofa. Then he does a selection process of sifting with a sieve, a third malacha. Umegabil hatit dahainu losh. Then he kneads it together with water. Umemareach hatit kishaoise hagoylem sheyechalak harimemachek. Then he goes ahead and he smooths out the piece to then form into a chavis, which is the malacha of smoothing memachek. Umavir es ha'or bekivshon, and then he puts a fire on, he ignites the flame. Umetzarf betoichay harim vasha, and then he puts it into the tanur and he cooks it, a malacha of bishul, and therefore we have our 7 malachos. Back in the Gemara, tanura chayim mishum shmoina chatos. Unlike the barrel that we just mentioned, that itself becomes formulated after he put it into the oven, there's an 8th malacha. If he now wants to make a tanur, by making a tanur, he has to then go ahead and further insulate it. By after putting it into the kilt, he has to then put another layer of clay around it to insulate the tanur, and that will be a malacha of makeh bepatish. The Gemara now goes on to say, Omar Abaye, Hai man da ovad chalta chayiv achas esrei chatos. If a person makes a wicker basket, he's going to be chayiv a total of 11 chatos. There's 11 malachos that are going to then be done when making this wicker basket. Let's take a look again in Rashi. This time Rashi is on the 3rd line when it gets wide. Chayiv Yud Aleph, says Rashi to enumerate, Zoimer hakanim v'utzorich lahem chayiv mishum koitem mishum noiteya. When he prunes the reeds, so he's going to be chayiv 2 different malachos. One, since he needs the reeds, he's going to be chayiv koitzer, and since it's going to cause the plant to grow further, it's going to be a malacha of noiteya. Asvam yachad harezim ma'amer. He's going to then gather them together. It's a malacha of ma'amer. Birer yafois hareze boirer. When he takes out the good ones, then he's selecting, and that's boirer. Hichlikon hareze memachik. When he smooths them out, that's a malacha memachik. Ason dakois me'achas. Shtayim asholosh hareze toichen. When he takes the reeds and he slices them to very thin pieces, then that's going to be the malacha of toichen. Chotchon b'mida hareze mechatech. When he cuts them into size, that's going to be the malacha mechatech. Haseich hashesi hareze meisach. When he sets up the shesi, that's going to be another malacha of meisach. Oreg achas lamala v'achas lamata kedei lahamidoi harei oise shesi shtei bate nirin. When he then takes the and he weaves twice to then place it to make batei nirin, that's another malacha. Orag hareza oreg, when he weaves it to make the basket, he's going to be chayiv for oreg. Chotach la'achar arigosa kedei lahashvoisom hareze make bepatish, when he cuts the ends that are sticking out, because he's makpi that they shouldn't be sticking out from his basket, that's considered to be make bepatish, a gemar malacha. So here's chayiv in total 11 malachas for making a wicker basket. Abai goes on to say back in the Gemara, v'ichaite lepume, if literally he is going to stitch a mouth, meaning to say he wants to make a border, chayiv shalosh esrei chatos, he's additional to the 11 we just mentioned, he's going to be chayiv for 2 additional malachos. The malacha of toifer, as he's going to then stitch the mouth, the edge of the wicker basket, the borders, and he's going to do malacha of koisher when he has to tie that together. So therefore, bichayev an additional 2 malachas, a total of 13 chatos. Says the Gemara Vayter, quoting the Mishnah, after we talk about the Sidurei, the Pas, we get into the 13 malachos that have to do with making begadim. Hagoyzes is hatsemer v'hamalabenoi, shearing wool and whitening, cleaning them. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbe bar Chana Amar B'Yochanan, hatoivet semer she'al gabe behema b'Shabbos chayiv shalosh chatos. If a person spins wool on top of a behema, that means while it's on the behema, the wool is on the behema, he does so on Shabbos, he's going to be chayiv 3 different chatos as follows. Achat mishum goizes, 1 for shearing, va'achas mishum menapetz, and 1 for combing and entangling the wool, va'achas mishum toiv, and 1 for then spinning the wool. Rav Kahana Omar, ein derech giziza bekach ve'ein derech menapetz bekach ve'ein derech tovui bekach. This is not the derech to then take the wool that's on the animal and go ahead and comb it out and then spin it and then shear it. That's not the derech. And therefore, that's not considered to be a malacha deraisa that's going to be chayiv chatos. It'll be asur midrabanan, but it's not chayiv chatos. Ask the Gemara to challenge this. Is that so? Velo? Is he not going to be chayiv? Is not going to be the derech? Vehatanya, it says in the Brisa, Mishmei de Rabbi Nechemia, Shotuf be'izim v'tovu be'izim. They would wash the wool and they would spin the wool. I want to quote you the pasuk, V'chol isha chachmas leiv biyadeha. The woman, every woman who had chachmas leiv, Tovu v'yaviu matve es hatcheles v'es ha'argamon v'es ha'tolaz ha'shoni v'es ha'shesh. They would spin all of the different strings, the threads. V'chol ha'noshim asher nosa libon oisona b'chochma tovu es ha'izim. They would be toive. They would spin the wool of the izim. The Gemara explains, Alma tevia al gabe behema shmo tevia. Since they did so and it was on the behema, the words of the pasuk that says Tavu es ha'izim means Tavu im ha'izim, or al ha'izim. It means that they spun the wool while it was on the back of the animal. So you see that it's a derech. Answers the Gemara, no, chachma yiseira shiny. The chachma yiseira that these women had that did this for the b'niyas hamishkan, this was a special type of event, and therefore that's not the typical way. Certainly one shears first the wool, then he disentangles by combing out the wool, and then finally he spins the wool. 3 different malachos d'oraisa. Says the Gemara, Tani Rabbanan, bring the following brisa: hatoilesh es haknaf, somebody who plucks out a feather, vehakoitmoi, and he cuts the top of the feather, which is more soft and has some of the hairs that is used for stuffing pillows and blankets. V'hamorto, and he takes off the hairs that are on the bottom part. Chayiv sholosh chatos. He's chayiv for 3 different chatos. Amar Rabbi Shimon Lakish to explain. Toilesh chayiv mishum goizes. When he plucks the feather, it's like shearing the wool. It's the same malacha of goizes. Koitem chaye mishum mechatech. When he cuts the top and takes the top part of the feather that is softer, that's a malacha of mechatek because he cuts it to a size, the part that he wants. Memaret, when he takes off the hairs from the bottom part, chaye mishum mechek, it's like taking from the skin of an animal and scraping off the hairs, smoothing it out. The Gemara now quotes two additional malachos, hakoisher v'hamatir, one who ties a knot and one who unties a knot. Ask the Gemara, Keshira b'mishkan heicha havoi, where was the malacha of tying a knot in the Mishkan? Answers the Gemara, Amarove shekain koishin b'yeseidos oihalim. They would tie knots when they would take the yirios and they would tie them down to pegs, to stakes that were on the ground. That would be the kishorim that they would make. Ask the Gemara, Hahu koisher amanas lahatirhu. This is a knot that is amanas lahatir, that's made to be opened. In order to be chayiv a korban chatas for keshira, it has to be a keshira, a kesher shel kayama. Answers the Gemara, Ela Omar Baye shekain orge yirios shenifsiko lehen nima koishin oiso. The weavers of the yirios, the curtains of the Mishkan, when they would have a piece of thread that would break, then they would tie a knot. Says the Gemara, Omole Rava teratz koisher. That's good explanation for the malacha of kshira. But matir mai ikala meimar. But what about the malacha of untying the knot? We have two malachos, koisher and matir. Says the Gemara, "V'chitema di'imisrami leitrei chute kitrei bahadi adodi shori chad v'koter chad." If you're going to tell me there's going to be two knots that are one beside another, and he then unties one of those knots because it would be too gas, it would look too unfitting to be sticking out. If there were two knots, it would be adjacent to each other. Therefore, they would open and untie one of the knots. Ask the Gemara, if that's so, v'chitemo di misrami leitrei chuti kitre bahadi adodi shori chad v'koder chad, would they do that? Hashted lifnei melech bosar v'adam ein oisin ken lifnei melech malchei malachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu oisin. If in front of a regular king of flesh and blood, that would not be befitting. Would you then do that before HaKadosh Baruch Hu and make the yerios in such a way by making a hole next to the knot, by untying one of the two knots, leaving a hole? That would be certainly unacceptable. Ella says the Gemara, Amarov v'itemo Rabbi Eloi shekain sidei chilozoin koishin umatirin. When they would trap the chilozoin, the type of fish that was used for its techeles, the blood of the chilozon, which would come out every 170 years, would come out from the sea, and was able to be then used for its blood, which would be the techeles. So they would have to trap it with different types of nets. Therefore, they would tie the nets, they would take the strings and tie the nets, and sometimes they would untie the knots because they'd have to make them bigger or smaller. And therefore, that was the malacha of koisher and matir in the Mishkan. The Gemara now quotes, "V'hatoifer shtei tefiros," one who is toifer, shtei tefiros, he stitches two tefiros. Says the Gemara, "V'holo kaima." If you're going to do two tefiros over here, it doesn't mean two stitches like we do know in the classical way. It means one in and one out. Ask the Gemara, if it's one in and one out, then it's going to become untied. It's not going to have any kiyum. So how can that be the malacha of tefira? Omar Rabbi bar bar Chana, Omar B'yoichan v'hu shekashon. And Hachanami, we're talking about after he does an in and out position, he'd have to then tie the end. So indeed, he would be chayiv really two malachas in such a situation, the minimum of tefira, and as well as in a malacha of kishira.